I want to talk about what you should charge today in the world of music. There's less money in music today than there was ever before. And it's kind of only been getting worse from like 1995. In 95, major labels would have a budget, let's say, of $250,000 to make records. That's where you get guys like Eric Valentine buying tons of gear with the budget to make the record that he then had his whole career. And he was able to afford it because of a budget like that to make one record. Brendan O'Brien, how do you think he amassed his collection of amazing musical gear? Because the budgets at the time they were making records allowed for it. Fast forward from 1995 to 2005, the amount of money in music was a fraction of that. It became, we have barely $50,000. Can you get it all done for that, including mixing? So all in budget of 50 grand to make a record was pretty much the standard in around 2005. And that is the same people who used to pay $250,000 on that budget to make the record. So that's how much it changed in that amount of time. Now, fast forward to today. It's crazy what people just don't have money to spend. They really have very little to spend. Every once in a while, you might get some sort of vanity project, but other than that, it's mostly the people who are making music who don't have major label support, who barely, maybe they don't have indie support. Like, you're getting nothing really they don't have much money. So you have to kind of structure your prices accordingly. Now, in my opinion, this applies on all levels, but especially like if you're trying to get hired to do live sound or something, because there's a lot of crossover. What it takes to learn how to do what we do is years and years and years of mixing. Practice gets you to a point where you can mix something that doesn't sound bad. Now, that translates to a live environment. And there's some other things like little differences and things you got to learn to be able to cope with live situations. And some I've talked about previously, but a lot of which has to do with mic placement, monitor placement, because you've got way more sound that's live kicking around in the room. And essentially, that means that every microphone you have is also going to double as like an overhead. And if it's a guy moving around on the stage, it's a roving overhead. It's constantly moving. So there's a lot more to it, and a lot of people don't have, but it's very valuable to have a live soundboard that has gates on it so you can close the mic off when there's nobody actively singing into it. But even so, you're still going to be hit with a lot of things that you wouldn't encounter in a studio environment. The pressure is higher because, if you get something wrong, like there's just more stress, I find, because I've sort of done a little bit of both, but it's just more stress in a live environment because if there's feedback, like you got to kill that. You got to figure it out quick. You got to dial in the sound quick. A lot of times there's no time for sound check because in order to allow for a sound check, you might have had to get there hours before. Like if it's an all day party or something and they're starting at 7 o'clock, people are probably there before that. So the band doesn't really do a sound check. Like you just dial it in on the first song kind of thing. So you got to be quick. Now, all of this comes into play with what you should charge because your experience level is why you should charge what you should charge. But this is the other thing, right? So what I mean by that is if you don't have a lot of experience doing whatever it is you're trying to get paid for, you can't really justify charging a lot. But if you've spent years mixing and you are a very good mixer, we know that takes years of dedicated practice to be able to do that. Now, to do that in a live environment, you've spent the years learning how to dial things in, learning what frequencies sound like what, learning the tricks to make things sound good. So, in my opinion, that translates to a live environment, plus the travel time that you got to do back and forth, plus getting there early to help set up, make sure everything's in the right place so it doesn't suck, plus the hours of standing there. Because a lot of times these shows could be like a 3 hour live event or something. The band may play for 45, 50 minutes, take 10-minute break, and then do 3 sets. So you're there for a long time. And it might take you time to get there and back, and it's cost gas money. So no matter how you look at it, like that's going to kill 5, 6 hours of your time. So the way I think about pricing is this, and I think everyone should kind of go with this, right? You don't really know what you're worth until you've spent enough time doing something where then you know what it would cost to piss you off if you didn't get enough. So in other words, the way I look at it is like if there's a 5 hour, I got to kill 5.5 hours, let's say, hour and a half driving, hour to set up, like 3 hour show. I don't know. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 hours, let's say, right? I know what it would cost, what it would take for me to not be pissed off to spend all that time doing that. And what I would do is think to myself, okay, if I don't do that, what is the dollar amount worth, sitting in my studio working on something for that amount of time? So, in other words, if I have a song to mix, it takes me how long, it costs me how much, like I charge how much for that. Then I equate that to, okay, I'm going to spend that amount of time going to this place and doing live sound for somebody. Now, what I often do is I will take that number, whatever it is I'm thinking that would make me happy, like very happy with the number, not extremely happy, not the most I could get, just like, okay, I'm happy with this number. And then I cut it down a little bit because if I cut it down a little bit when I say this is what it costs, I'm preparing myself for the fact that if they come back like most people, I mean, people don't have money today. That's why I had to start with that. If I'm charging too much based on that number where I cut it down a little, so I'm already thinking this is what I want to do it because that's fair, and now I'm going to cut it down a little bit. I know that no matter what they say, I can sleep at night, whether they accept or not, because I didn't charge them as much as I could have charged them, and I didn't charge them nothing where it's going to make me pissed off to having accepted this thing. So I'm charging them, what I think would be fair minus a little bit. So I'm actually taking less, and I put that in writing. I send it over, and if they don't want to do it, I know I didn't lose out on anything. I know that I put down what I was worth because in my opinion, it's a fair price when you would want more, but you're taking less. It's like that's as fair as you can get in this game. There will be people who won't pay you. You know how many times somebody would like you'd offer them a number. This is what it is, okay? If it's close enough, like in the realm of possibility, they'll negotiate. If they are so far away from you that it makes no sense, they won't negotiate. So you shouldn't respond to something when they say something like, "Hey, we can't do that. That's too expensive. Sorry, better luck, next time we'll do something else." If they say something like that, don't negotiate against yourself and come back and say, "Oh, well, I'm willing to do it for less." One, that makes you look bad, but two, you should have started with that number because then you would know that is you would feel good about it. You'd feel good that they can walk and you gave them your best price already. So this is important to being able to sleep at night. It applies to live sound, it applies to doing mixes, in your own studio, it applies to charging for people to come record with you and you're going to engineer them. It applies to producing a track from scratch. It applies to mastering. It applies to everything, in my opinion. You will find out what you're worth over enough time. And the people who wind up getting any kind of accolades, it becomes easier and easier to charge more once that happens. But if you do a job for somebody and they like it, and then somebody else hears that and wants to hire you, asks you what you charge, and then you tell them what I said about the numbers, so you go where you would be happy. This is fair to you, not the most happy. That's what I mean. You're not just picking a random number and saying, "Oh, I really want this." You're just thinking, this is fair based on what I get paid and the time it would take and the gas there and the time or whatever it is, right? Whatever, you're adding up all your expenses. This is what it would take. And then you're cutting that down a little. Once you cut that down a little, you no longer need to negotiate. That's what I'm saying. You no longer need to come back and say, "Ooh, what about a little less?" Because in my opinion, the people who try to get the most as they possibly can, you're just setting yourself up to then lose more gigs than you should and not be able to sleep at night because you will know that, man, I really wish I could have worked with that band. I would have accepted less. So, like, it always you fight with yourself, and the worst thing we could do as creative people is create more reasons to fight with ourselves. We must always know we're both fair, honest, and also not willing to put ourselves on the line for getting walked over, because people will try to pay you nothing. You know, if it's very possible that a band in a live situation accepts something very little like $50 or $100 a man for like a 5 or 6 piece band, for example. Let's say they might accept $100 a man to play for 3 hours or something. And that includes them setting up their stuff, them breaking down their stuff. They might accept that. Why? Because it's fun to play live. So they're offsetting the fact that it doesn't pay them a lot. They're offsetting that with fun. Whereas when you're working, the fun isn't part of the equation. Now it's stressful. Now you got to deal with personalities, everybody who thinks they know what they're supposed to do, and everybody's going to make your life harder. Like it's just bound to happen. And if it doesn't, then you got lucky. But the rest of the time, it could happen. And there's a lot of pressure on you to get things right. And essentially, you're being hired to work, not to have fun. So as a result, you shouldn't be willing to do all that. You shouldn't be willing to do the work for the same amount of money unless you need the experience. And that's where it all boils down to is like, if you don't have any experience and you want experience, well, do whatever you have to and, get paid whatever you can to make it happen so you can get experience. But just be prepared that no one will think you're worth anything if you charge nothing. And no one will think you're worth anything if you charge very, very little. So you may not be worth anything, in which case it might be okay to charge nothing or very little. But if you've been putting in the time, you know something that other people don't know, unless it's like that, if it is like that, where you do know something, then charge something. And like I said, figure out what that number is. And you never have to worry about this kind of thing, like, coming back at you or anything. Because, like, you could charge your friends who are your close buddies one thing because they're your friends. Like, I got close friends who helped me carry the desk into the studio, who showed up when I needed them, to do certain things. I got close friends like that where, something's going on and I need help, they would be there. That's not the same thing as, guys you don't know trying to hire you to do work. For my close friends, I do favors because they're my close friends, and that's what we do. We do favors for each other. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about guys you don't know, and it just work. It's work is what it is. If you're putting in the work and you're getting hired to do it, make sure you could sleep at night by doing what I just said. Because I've taken gigs for very little and been pissed off that I did it. It's like overworked with stress, overworked with lugging things around, carrying stuff, and none of the fun, which is how I know to explain it this way. Because when I was playing in a cover band and I would basically be in the band having fun, and sure, I'll help run the sound. And I did all sorts of stuff while I was in it, like literally wore a freaking, headphone thing and wireless everything so I could go stand in the crowd and listen and then tweak the knobs and play from the crowd and then get on stage and do what I had to do, because there was enough support in that band to kind of allow for that. And I was having the fun of doing it. So I basically just got one of the cuts of everybody in the band. We all got equal cuts, and I did a little extra work because the fun could offset so many things. But if you're just working and there's no fun of playing live and getting to, to me, that's better than hanging out playing live. So in my opinion, if I got to go do work, I got to get paid for it. And I know what it would take to not make me upset for having accepted it. Because I also know what I get paid to sit here and mix. And if I'm sitting here and mixing, it's a lot easier than a high pressure live situation where I got to go and make sure everything is solid on you know what I'm saying? There's so much to this, but there's guys that are really good. People will pay more for it. It's funny because at first they don't realize how important it is. But if you've ever paid, it's not about like who charges the least amount of money, because especially in what we do, the more experience you have, the better you can make things sound. Whether you're engineering the studio or mixing the studio or mixing live, you have experience you bring to the table, which means you can charge what you're worth because of your how good you are. But some people want to spend as little as possible and they just want someone to do it. They don't need them to know how to do it well. And that's short-sighted, ridiculous thinking, but that's what you will encounter when people don't wanna pay for things they should pay for, because no band sounds half as good or even a quarter as good as they could if they had a guy doing sound who knew what he was doing. But most bands are not willing to pay for that. So what happens? Sometimes they get sound where you could barely hear certain things. It sounds awful. Every band sounds way worse than they really are, but nobody wants to pay for that to change. So it's funny to me how, you know, best compliment like I ever got was I did live sound for somebody once and they were like, "Listen, I've never been able to hear myself as well as I heard myself tonight, and everything sounded so good." And like that right there, that compliment is amazing. And that is something that I think if more bands realize they play better when they hear better. Try practicing and in a jet airliner, you're in an airplane hangar with airplanes coming and going and you're on an airport. You're on a monster truck rally, racetrack. And try practicing your nylon string. Good luck. You can't hear yourself. You can't play in a way that makes you happy. You can't play well if you can't hear yourself. If you can't hear your vocals, you wind up belting and screaming and overworking your vocal cords till you really stress them out, especially over a long period of time, and it doesn't sound good. If you can hear yourself, you'd be surprised how well you could perform. That's why sound is so important, and I don't even like doing live sound, but I know what it takes for me to do it, and I'm not a moving man. I'm a mixer. So if you want me to show up and mix, I'll do that. But that means the bands are setting up their own stuff. Like, I'll come and make sure everything's in the right place because I know what I'm doing with mic placement. But that doesn't mean that I don't want them to do it first. You guys get it all set up, everything on stands, all your monitors, all your everything, and then I'll just dial it in right before we start, and then I'll mix the show. But I ain't carrying anything. I ain't bringing anything around. I'm not a moving man. I'm not a sound company. I am a mixer who will make you sound great live, and that's what I do. So I know what I do, and I know what it costs me to do it, so that's what I charge. And like I said, a little bit less so that I can sleep at night every time, no matter what they say. And I never negotiate against myself because that's what happens when people don't have confidence. In the real estate game, it's the same as in the music game. Every single time people, you give them a price, oh, no, we can't do it. If you negotiate against yourself, you'll never get what you wanted to get, and you'll always wind up doing way more work than you wanted to do. Whereas if you say, okay, no problem, you'd be surprised. Sometimes they come back and they say, okay, we can't do it for that. We're willing to do it for this. Will you do it this time? Then you make a decision. But at least they're negotiating. You're not negotiating against yourself. You get what I'm saying? And you never have to change it. If you make that price where it's the bare minimum, where you know you can't take $1 less, then don't take $1 less. And that's what I recommend so that you could sleep at night. Because once people realize the better the person who's sitting there, the better they sound, the happier the crowd is, the more they get booked again and again, the more money they make in the long run. That's real thinking. Short-sighted thinking is, oh man, it's $100 more than we wanted to spend, or it's $200 more, it's $150, or whatever the number is that they're pissed off that you gave them a little too high. It's ridiculously short-sighted thinking. Go get somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, who has all the equipment. Plenty of guys have all the equipment and don't have the skill, so they'll set up all their equipment for you, and they still make you sound like shit. Have fun with that. Or you get somebody who knows what they're doing and knows their value, knows their worth, and then you just sit back and have a great show, and everybody in the audience knows how good you really sound. Up to you. So Do this kind of thing when you're pricing everything you do, because it's the same for mixes. They could pay somebody less and they'll get a mix that's not as good as somebody worth more. That's how it works. That's why Serbin charges what he charges, upwards of $10,000 a song, I'm sure. Who knows what it's up to now? That's what it was years ago. So I know some guys, top level guys. If I'm not mistaken, CLA charged like $2,500 a mix, something like that. I know Kevin Shirley years ago charged, what did he charge? $2,000 a mix. I know other top mixers are in that like $2,500, $2,000 a mix ballpark. The only one who's at the top tier who can charge that crazy amount is Serbin, because he's the top guy right now. So until he's not the top guy, he'll have that top billing. So anyway, just so everybody's on the same page, I hope you dug it. Questions, comments, answers, throw it in there. Hit the like button, will you? Subscribe. I appreciate it. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.